Identity is key. And when we look at things like, there is a relatively high level of suicide within veterans and within military.
Yeah.
Veterans, we can almost categorically argue that there's a lack of identity that comes into that. I am a Royal Marines Commando.
Yeah.
I was a Royal Marines Commando. Okay, so what am I now? And when I left, and obviously I went back and worked again, when I was working in London, I wasn't necessarily proud compared to what I was before. Now, pride comes before a fall, 7 deadly sins, all that, I get that. But it's a human condition that we are proud.
Yeah.
What makes you proud? What do you want to be? And if you met you, what would you want to see in that person? If somebody left the room having met you and said, oh, that person was this, this and this, what are those things?
That's good.
What do you want them to say about you?
That's good. Sean Lerwill. So we've obviously had a bit of a chat leading up to this, and now I'm even more excited than I was before, because the little chat that we've had just downstairs, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, there's a lot of psychology here. There's a lot of passion here. There's a lot of experience. And I know our listeners are going to benefit from this in a massive way.
Well, I hope so.
Let's start with you being named after Sean Connery. Tell me more.
I think sort of my mum's age, I guess. It was either going to be James, but she didn't want me to be shortened to Jim or Jimmy. No offense to anybody out there who's a Jim or a Jimmy. My best mate through school was a Jim, so and he's half Italian, so pretty cool. But no, so it settled on Sean. You know, you can't shorten it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
That's where it came from.
Love it, mate. Love it. I'm going to ask you a question, Sean, and it's phrased as a statement, but it is a question. And what I want you to do is I just want you to answer it through your subconscious, just not thinking about it too much. Just allow whatever the first thing that pops into your mind.
Okay.
That's what I want to know about. Start at the beginning.
Probably my mum deciding that her education wasn't what it should be. So if she was going to give me anything, it was a good education.
Let's start there. Tell me about that.
So when I was, I don't know what it would be, 11 years old, she decided that I should take an entrance test to a local private school. Whatever people think, pros and cons of private schools, it did me some good. I think part of that was my parents broke up when I was about 10 months old. I only saw my father once or twice a year. Grandfather was very influential for me. Second World War, your classic East End Brit who joined the military, and really influential to me. Sadly died when I was 14, so sort of that mid-teen era I kind of lost him. But the school I went to, my mum's aim was I would have some positive male role models, and it did really good things for me. I was a county cross-country runner, county athlete, ran in the national championships, played football locally, played rugby for the school, and did well in my GCSEs, well in my A-levels. I was going to have to leave the school for my A-levels because the entrance exam I sat, that meant that I got help, the school fees got help. We couldn't afford it. My mum was a nurse for 40 years, so she couldn't afford it. But they don't pay for sixth form. So when I was 15 and a half, I decided that I was going to do an army scholarship.
Right.
Because if I got sponsored by the army, they would keep me at the school.
Right.
So that's what I did. So I was lucky enough to I actually broke the assault course record, and then a few weeks later, another lad from my school, knowing I did it, he went along and broke it again. But yeah, so that got me sponsored by the army through my sixth form. And if you want to start from the beginning, I guess in terms of military, that's where that kind of started.
What do I need to know about your upbringing to understand more about the man that sits in front of me today?
Really good question. I suspect my mum's influence as a nurse was, I'm going to use the word discipline, and discipline has some connotations to some people that it's a negative, and I don't think it's a negative. I think if you want to succeed in life, you're not always going to be motivated. When I work with clients, sometimes they say to me, how do you always stay motivated? Well, I don't always stay motivated, but I know what needs to be done to get to the end. And you'd think for a military person, well, that was instilled in the military. Well, no, actually, when I was at uni, I was that person that for my 6 weeks before my exams, I would get up at this time at 8:30, I would study until 10:30, then I'd have a half an hour break, then I would study till lunch, then I'd have an hour off for lunch, then I'd study till 3, go and do some exercise. And I think that came from my my mum. And I guess with nursing in those days, the nurses cleaned the ward. She's very clean, very thorough. This goes there, this goes there. This is the way it needs to be. You need to get up. You know, I mean, I learnt to tie my shoelaces at 2 a.m. when she was a district nurse and she was on call. So even though I had school the next day, we had to get in the back of the car, get up, get in the back of the car, sit in the car. I've got to go in and see a patient.
Yeah.
And I think that probably taught me a work ethic.
Militant, I would say, you know, in terms of the how your mum would need to be at her work.
Yeah, she wasn't with me. I mean, I wasn't.
No.
I wasn't the bad kid that she needed to be militant with, and it wasn't that at all. But it's just, I guess, when you're a single parent with an only child running a household,
Yeah.
and you know you've got to run the household and earn the money.
Absolutely.
It's got to be organised, otherwise it's not going to happen.
And the way that you described what she would do in her work, you know, that in itself feels like it needs to be militant because, of course, you're working in an environment where it's life or death.
And that's where we've really gelled as I've got older, because I joined the military, and you can understand each other's world, that they are both life and death. If somebody forgets the med pack, or somebody forgets the radio, or doesn't charge the batteries, for the military, attention to detail is everything.
Yeah.
And that's something that the initial training it's all about. You have to get that.
Definitely.
Same with nursing. If you know, the old joke, isn't it? You see a movie where they've left the scalpel inside the person and they've sewn them up. But you need to know where everything is. Everybody needs to know their job, and they need to do their job on time. They need to be professional. And I say this to my clients. Do you always do your job to your 100% absolute perfect level? I've never met anybody who says, yeah.
Sure.
No one does.
Yeah.
I didn't sleep very well last night. I've gone through a breakup. I'm hungover. I'm not very well.
Yeah.
So sometimes we get angry with certain people in society. It may be a doctor. It may be whoever it is that, oh, well, I don't think, well, no, because like you, they might be having a bad day. And I think we can all realise that. So, but in those certain professions, you don't want them to have a bad day when you're on the operate table, or, you know, do you know what I mean?
So true, so true. What is it that you tell me a little bit about your coaching? I just want to know a little bit about your coaching style and what your niche is.
I say it's very holistic. So I've got the military background. The military taught me to coach. They put me through my PGCE, so I'm a teacher. I went into the physical training department of the Royal Marines. So you after a few years as a general duties Marine, you can specialise in different areas. I went down the physical training instructor route, and then you go back to your green stuff and you bounce between them. I left the military for a period. I managed a gym in London called the Third Space, and then had personal training clients. I stopped doing that and then had a business where I trained people. I then went down the nutritional route because I knew that to really attain peak physical fitness or physical health, nutrition was everything. And then I stepped back into academia. So I did a degree in genetics. So I like to understand how our genes allow us to be the best we can be, or in some ways might be a battle that we need to overcome. And then I went down the psychology route and did a master's in psychology. So I think my coaching encompasses all of that.
Wow. Holy shit. I mean, in terms of different mediums, different areas of expertise that have been combined into one, it's almost, just off the basis of what you've just told me, it's almost the perfect combination of the physical and the mental, and everything that is encapsulated within the physical, not only what we're doing with our bodies, but what we're consuming, and that how that has an effect on the mental, and then of course the mental psychology, the thought process. That, to me, when I look at it as in this kind of pattern mindset I've got, are the two twin pillars of what makes up a person. So if your coaching focuses on that, it's like all bases covered.
Yeah, and I've looked at a few models, and I did write one essay on one during my master's, which was this sort of triad of physical health, mental health, and nutrition. And you can't really have the physical health without the mental health. You're probably not going to have the mental health without the physical health. And if you're not, it's what we consume. You know, you say what you consume in terms of food, but what you consume in terms of media, television, books, other people, all those things come together. So that triad's great, but I almost widen that into, and we discussed this briefly before we came in. I almost say that there's a foundation, which is nutrition. And I wholeheartedly believe you remove that, you get that wrong, you're probably not going to be able to get your mental health, your physical health, and then other things that come along with that. But underneath that nutrition, you've got sleep. And if the sleep isn't right, you're probably not going to be able to get the nutrition right, because you're going to make bad choices, but you're not going to be mentally well enough to be physically well enough. Your physical training isn't going to be good enough to overcome any mental health issues. So I even say it's sometimes like the spokes of a wheel, and I've got multiple. You've got personal relationships, you've got work relationships, you've got purpose, you've got aims and goals, you've got nutrition, you've got sleep, you've got physical health, you've got mental health, you've got flexibility, mobility, all these things. And if any of them are not quite right, the wheel probably won't function. So yeah, you're right. It's a holistic approach.
With some of our listeners, there's going to be we have lots of people that listen to this podcast, and like we were talking about before, they kind of generally fall into one of two categories. There are the people that are on their own self-development journey, and there are those people that have been on the journey for a while and now they're coaches. For those individuals that are at the beginning of the self-development journey, this may only be the first or second podcast they've listened to with the idea of, I can become a better version of myself, I can actually focus in on myself and develop myself. What would you say are some of the starting points that someone needs to focus on if they want to go on the journey of becoming a better version of them?
I'd say there are two things that I would say. There's lots of things.
Yeah,
two things would be really useful to do. One of my favourite quotes, and I said it on another podcast when they said, you like quotes, what's your favourite one? Is know thyself. And the reason for that is we are all different. So I can say to you, right, not that I would, but you should do this. This person should do this. That's great, but just because that worked for me, you've already spoken about the way your mind works. So you know your mind. So certain things are going to work for you, certain things aren't. So that comes to the second point, which is, and it's very cliche, but we said it in the Royal Marines PT branch, tools for your toolbox. You might see an instructor, you might see a coach, and you absolutely love what they do, but don't copy them verbatim. What is it you like about them?
Yeah.
And we spoke before this briefly. There are some people that you might really respect and really like some of the things they say and do, but there'll be other things like that doesn't wash with me.
Sure.
Great. Well, don't worry about that. That's natural. We're all going to do that. So take what you like, add it to your toolbox, and know. And you asked me before, what's my sort of coaching style? I don't necessarily have a set framework. I'm probably more like some clinical psychologists in the sense that I'm going to rely on my brain to feed me what, and then we might finish the session. I'm going to look something up on that, but I'm not going to make it a set way of doing it, because in the same way that I'm not going to tell you what to do when you're thinking about being a coach, I'm not going to know what I'm going to do with this client because I don't know what the issues are yet. So
that's so true as well, and because everybody's so different, everybody's so unique. Even though that's the case, and with that in mind, is there a particular type of outcome that you kind of generally think, this is the outcome that I tend to want to get for my clients, even though everybody's different? Or is it completely different every single time, depending on who you're working with? The outcome will be drastically different.
The outcome from a personal perspective is success.
Sure.
Their success. What their success is different.
Yeah.
And equally, and a client that I'm working with at the moment, we have done 20 plus sessions now, and I think the success that the individual stated on weeks 1 and weeks 2, when we did a reset 16, 17 weeks later, they are different.
Exactly.
Because of what we've talked about and the realization that maybe that isn't what I actually want. Actually, I now realize that this is what I want, and it's very different to this. This was maybe what society tells me I should want.
Yeah.
This is actually what I want. So
true.
That's what I want. I want them to realize what they want and what success is for them, and then putting into place what they need to gain it. And I said earlier in this, you might be on one trajectory and then something happens and it takes you in a different way. But as long as you keep aiming for something.
That actually leads me on very nicely to something we were talking about earlier. How vital is it to keep reassessing your goals?
I think it's really important, because you might realize on the way to a goal that actually, as that client did, this isn't what I really want. This is my parents' goal. This is me trying to keep up with the Joneses. This is me thinking that because society says you're only successful if you go to uni, get a high paid job, move to the city, get a higher paid job, get promoted, get the big mortgage. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I've done elements of that might be suitable for you, but it equally might not be suitable for you. You might have, we talked about knowing yourself, you might on the personality framework have something that might be very high in neuroticism. So going and working, and I've had a client with this for KPMG, for Accenture, and the only way you're going to climb the ladder is if you're looking over your shoulder because they're going to stab you in the back. That's not the place for you because of your personality, but you might come into coaching and be really self-aware that you can help other people be self-aware who may be going down the same pitfalls you are without prejudging. So reassessing your goals, but also, and this is something I've said to people a lot, you might attain your goal, And now what? You're going to sit back and put your feet up for the rest of your life. That's not healthy for your mind.
So true.
What's the next one? What? And you don't have to have a next one, but it might simply be, well, do you know what? I want to be able to do the splits. Well, that's not the same as a professional goal, but it's still something that at the end of your working day, you've got something to aim at, something to work towards. It might be one of my close friends who I suppose is a pseudo client. He really wants to find that life partner. So it's talking about the strategies that he's employing to do that, and whether they're going to help him or not. And that's his goal at the moment. That's fine.
It's a goal.
That might change.
Absolutely. I just find that really interesting, and it's so vital because it's growth. What I hear when we have these kind of conversations is continuous growth, and it's such a vital part of the human experience, and it can be related to so many different things. A plant will continuously grow, and the moment it stops growing, it starts to die.
Yeah.
And I think it was, I can't remember the guy who said that. I'm pretty sure it was like a famous American football coach or something that said, if we're not growing, we're dying.
Yeah.
And I really believe that, and I really embrace that. And so I think the reevaluating of your goals is a crucial part of that continuous growth, because otherwise, like you said, you could be an actor and win the Oscar, and then you're like, what the fuck do I do now?
Exactly that.
And you mentioned that with some individuals in the military, once they get that green beret, it's like, well, I did it. So what happens now?
Yeah, and it's something that's so important when you're going through Royal Marines training. For me, that journey, although I was initially sponsored by the Army, I realised when I was in my first year at uni, actually that wasn't the direction. If I needed to aim high is not necessarily the right way to put it, but I wanted to go, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it as hard as it is. And so that green beret then becomes everything. And then people achieve it, and then, And what the problem with that is, sometimes then there's a job that comes after that.
Yeah.
Can that job live up to the expectation in the mind?
Wow.
Possibly not. Sometimes it will, but nobody, even somebody who's wanted to be a doctor and they've been through 6-7 years of study, and they've really knuckled down, studied, they've had to spend a lot of money in terms of loans and that sort of thing, and then you're doing the job that has cost you in time and effort a lot. Is every single day going to live up to? Possibly not.
Sure.
That's just a mindset, and we talk about that. So it's very natural, I think, to achieve anything that you've really put on a pedestal. Olympic athletes, Premier League footballers, MMA athletes. Your whole world is focused on this. And then you attain it, the Oscar. Is it going to be what you thought it was? And is the aftermath? We don't know, because you can't control that. It's what you can control, what you can't, right? So then sometimes we need to talk about that, and then look at, okay, well, what's another goal? What's the next one? What's the next? And for a lot of lads in the military, it'll be specialising on a difficult course, or I want to become a sniper, I want to become a mountain leader, I want to become a PTI. I might look at the special forces world, or I've done the military now. Let's park that. Let me see if I can attack the business world. I want to try and run a business, or I want to go and try banking, or whatever it is. So, but yeah, you're going back to your point. It's growth, and it's saying every human being is going to have issues in their life, breakups. Children are going to have problems at school, illness, death. These things, they are the human condition. We can't get away from them. Some of the ways that we can promote the positive hormones that we need, that daily dose, and stay in a positive place, is to do things with a purpose. You spoke about children drawing, I think, before we were chatting, and it allows them to have a positive impact, even for a few minutes of a day, which any goal will help you do in a positive way, rather than reaching for those negative positive hormone employment strategies, such as we talk about people addicted to their phone, Netflix, alcoholism, gambling, poor sexual practice, if you want to call it that. So goals help with that in my mind. Yeah,
I want to touch on that actually, because I think this is so relatable to the everyday person. The tagline at the Coaching Masters is that we're ordinary people. We want to give ordinary people extraordinary tools to create freedom for themselves and others. And that's because I'm an ordinary person. My business partner Lewis is an ordinary person. We're not superhuman. We've not found the secret sauce that we hold and nobody else has it, and therefore we're incredible. It's like we're just ordinary people that have learned these extraordinary tools. And that thing that we were talking about before about the reward, and you touched on it there in terms of purpose. I think it's so important to have a purpose that is above and beyond the reward. And we were talking about that study where they'd taken a group of children who loved to draw, and they would just draw just because they loved it, and then they were given a reward for drawing, you know, whether it was a gold star or a sweet or whatever. And then eventually, after they were given the reward, they wouldn't draw anymore unless they got the reward, because the dopamine hit came from the reward. It didn't come from the work or the purpose or the thing they loved. So what I'm seeing there in my mind is reward versus purpose.
Yeah.
And it very much feels like purpose is the real thing that we want to be striving for.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean, though, that somebody who goes into a certain role or work or choice of career that is money orientated is necessarily wrong.
Sure.
And my long-term ex-partner, she did that. She changed to a sales career structure, and it did change her slightly, the way she approached life. But that also suited her personality type. But that really was then, everything was about commission and it was about the reward.
Yeah.
But then maybe she had the right feedback, the dopamine feedback, the oxytocin that she got maybe from, you know, getting a sale when somebody else couldn't. And that was the right thing for her. That wouldn't work for me.
Sure.
I know that's not what I need.
Yeah, yeah.
So rounding that off then, goes back to know yourself, depending on who you are, deciding that you're going to go down a certain route for the purpose, but then you're going to be given that monetary reward for it. You have to be careful. And the reason I say that, and I mentioned this before, one thing I do say to people that give me a ring, I'm leaving the military and I really want to go into this and I want to start my own gym and I think it will be great. Well, be careful, because if you make your hobby your source of income, your hobby can become a negative.
Yeah.
Because when you run a gym, you're not just training every day.
Yeah,
you're doing the books, you're working out who you're going to employ, you're dealing with the tax.
Exactly.
It becomes a business, and then your business is associated with something you used to love. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying you can't do it, but you need to be careful. Sometimes if you really love doing this, park it over there.
Yeah.
Leave it for your spare time when it's purely dopamine, as you said, and it's not the drawing that you're now getting the gold star for.
Exactly.
And then earn your money over here. And again, this comes down to personality types, knowing yourself, and am I the sort of person that can do it as a oneer, or do I need to keep those two things separate?
Which third space was it?
So I was in the third space in Piccadilly before there were any others. And we decided when I was there that we were going to build a second one, and that was the Marylebone. And if you've been to the Marylebone one, I don't know if it's still the same, I haven't been for years, but there was 30-foot ropes that went up through a couple of floors. We cut through the floors, and there were some wooden beams. And myself and the general manager of third space at the time, we went down to the Commando training centre for me to say, look, I think we should have 30-foot ropes and we should have a beam. And then they did. So when the sales team were initially selling, you had people climbing up a 30-foot rope next to them while they were selling, which is a good selling point. So yeah, it was the original.
Nice, incredible. And one of the reasons I wanted to ask was because you mentioned before about the difference between the military and civilian work, right? And I really want to touch on this because I feel like there's so much wisdom and so much that civilians, much like myself and like a lot of our listeners, the majority of our listeners, will be able to take from this and your experience having gone through the military in the way that you did. So the question that I've got is, what can we as civilians, how can we benefit from the information that you have gathered throughout your years?
Oh, it's a good question. That probably could be a podcast in itself.
For sure.
So the military are often given or there's often the perception that the military hold the answers for coaching, for leadership, for team building. And that's where the Royal Marines certainly have had, England football come down, the England women's football team come down, England rugby before they won the World Cup. A few weeks ago, I'm working at the Commando Training Centre again at the moment. A few weeks ago, we had Chelsea Football Club, 6-8 weeks. Ring up, could we come down next Monday? There's a psychological block in terms of winning. We're not getting anywhere. This is before Potter went.
Yeah.
Can we come down and do some work with you? So the thing is do the military do anything that's actually that different from what everybody else does? You talked about a secret sauce with your business partner. We don't hold that. It's just maybe a different approach. And that approach sometimes is because of the people that we're coaching.
Yeah.
I'm not saying England football don't want to be there. I'm not saying anybody being coached doesn't want to be there. But if you join the military and you've all got one purpose as individuals to get your green beret, but collectively to become a group of people that can operate in a certain way under high pressure environments, you've got a collective audience. And that's sometimes really, really useful. What I found when I started leading, managing and coaching civilians was that mindset was slightly different. It wasn't always a captive audience. There were a lot of other external factors, whether that's, well, I'm not going to give up drinking because I have to entertain clients in the evenings, but I need you to give me the 6-pack and the men's health cover because that's what your job is. I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. Equally, and if any of them are listening, then it's water under the bridge. Within my first month at Third Space, I gave a verbal warning to one member of staff and a written warning to another because the way they operated was completely alien. So the first staff meeting I went into with, the Third Space, these are top level personal trainers. They've all been selected. They all know they're pretty good. So you're in a staff meeting with 30, 40 people, and the manager, who I was going to be taking over from, is sitting there having a chat, and they're talking amongst themselves. Now, in a military environment, that is totally unacceptable.
Of course.
So I was going to change that. And actually, I was brought in to change that and to give more military bearing to a workforce that should be achieving better.
High performers.
Yeah. So how do we get the best out of them? And what I did after I managed to make some negotiations with them about, what do you want? Well, you want this, but this is what the organisation wants. So if you do this for me, I'll make this happen for you. And, we got that to happen. What I found further down the line was actually the organisation probably wasn't, in terms of sick pay, in terms of holiday pay, in terms of pensions, that wasn't there. So if you're not respecting is possibly the wrong way. If you're not respecting the individuals well enough, then you can't expect them to fully be in this for you.
Absolutely.
So bringing this back round then, we go back to a military organisation, and certainly from my point of view, the Royal Marines, there's an ethos.
Yeah.
This is the ethos we have. These are the values that we hold. And when I go and speak to businesses, so on behalf of GSK, I used to speak to Boots, I used to speak to Holland and Barrett. If we can link into what your ethos is as a company and as a group of people, what do you want? What's your purpose collectively together?
Yeah.
And I think that's what the military does really, really well.
That is incredibly insightful, because I'd say the thing that really stood out and highlighted to me there was the benefit of having a personal ethos. And I think a lot of people miss that, because of course the military, like you mentioned, it's not that in itself is almost like the secret sauce. Is the ethos, and the fact that ethos is so ingrained and it's so clear, and it's not to be argued with. And I think in a very positive way, it's not to be argued with, because it's like, this is the ethos, this is the belief, this is what we do, this is how we do it. And what it does, in my mind, it seems like it creates this very, very clear understanding and clear pathway where everyone's on the same page, and therefore we're a unit because we're all working towards the same thing. I think people could benefit hugely from having a personal ethos.
I agree. I think they should. And just to really hit home what you've just said, the RSM Regimental Sergeant Major at Commando Training Centre at the moment, the Royal Marines Commando ethos and the Commando values are written down on a card. And when each Royal Marine gets their Green Beret and they're about to pass out, he gives them the card. And what first started happening is, as Royal Marines are taught to do, don't be Jack, which is not be selfish. You pass it back, you pass it around. Right. And he will go, no. I've given you that one. And he looks them in the eye and says, that's yours. He then says, let's look at them. And there's one I'm going to pick out because there's a few that are really important to me. My personal ethos, morals, or high morals, empathy, consistency, very, very rare, but so crucial to attain anything. But this one in particular was integrity. And he says, so what does it mean? What is it? And then starts to talk about where things you might do as a collection of young lads at the moment, because they're only male Royal Marines passing out at the moment, even though we have got females going through training, nobody's quite done it yet. So it's lads, where could you slip down on this integrity? And we talk about going out on nights out and, the sort of things that groups of lads might do. And then, is that integrity? If it's written here, if this is part of our ethos, what does it mean to you, and are you going to uphold it? And I think not just saying, well, this is our ethos, get on with it. It's, let's talk about what each of these things mean. Are you going to embody that? Are you going to do that every day?
Wow.
And that to me, we say, earn your beret every day. You've got a Green Beret. I earned mine 20 years ago. Are you going to earn it every day?
You know what, mate? Honestly, from a civilian's perspective, there is absolute golden nuggets here of how to be able to maximise your own performance and your own potential. The personal ethos thing is absolutely golden, but it's the consistency as well. Every day, earn the beret. That is absolutely gold, because one thing that stands out to me as well is I'm a very firm believer in the power of identity statements.
Oh, yeah.
I am, or I am not, and one example I always give is the difference. If somebody's trying to quit smoking, and they're saying, well, I shouldn't smoke in this environment with these people at this time. It's very, very weak. You know, there's all these different factors that are going to play into that. Whereas if they can get themselves to a point where they're able to say, I don't smoke, it's just not me, it's not who I am, and they can convince themselves of that, and they hold that identity statement, it's like it's a part of their personal ethos.
Yeah.
And they're not going to deter away from that because they know they need to earn it every single day. With your experience that you gathered, what are some of the ways that people can start to create their own ethos, their own personal ethos for themselves that they can stand behind?
I think it's looking at what is important to you, and you know, I'm going to come back to that question.
Yeah,
There's a couple of things I want to say on what you said.
For it.
Identity is key. And when we look at things like, you know, there is a relatively high level of suicide within veterans and within military.
Yeah.
Veterans, we can almost categorically argue that there's a lack of identity that comes into that. I am a Royal Marines Commando.
Yeah.
I was a Royal Marines Commando. Okay, so what am I now? And when I left, and obviously I went back and worked again, when I was working in London, or I might be the manager of Third Space, I wasn't necessarily proud compared to what I was before. Now, pride comes before a fall, 7 deadly sins, all that, I get that. But it's a human condition that we are proud.
Yeah.
I'm going to link that back now to what you are.
Absolutely, go for it.
What's your personal ethos? Well, what makes you proud? What do you want to be? And if you met you, what would you want to see in that person? If somebody left the room having met you and said, oh, that person was this, this, and this, what are those things?
That's good.
What do you want them to say about you?
That's good. That's good.
And that's what I've got. I've got a client at the moment who is looking at the political, you know, he's a counsellor, but looking at, you know, higher level politics. And we've had to talk about the halo effect. What is it that people will see in you? What do you want them to see in you? Because we know that people vote that way. It's not always about what you say. Sometimes, sadly, it's about the way you look. It's about the way you sound. It's about how you dress, what things you stand for. So I'd say that is key. If you want to know what your personal ethos is, look at the people around you. What would ask them?
Yeah.
If you're gonna say 3 things about me, what would you say they are?
That is absolutely golden, you know, because that I can imagine is a question that nobody's ever asked themselves before. But how revealing is that? If I leave a room, what do I want people to say about me? What are the 3 traits? What are the 3 things that I want them to say? Wow, he or she is like this, this, and this. And there you start to create your personal ethos.
And then you embody it, and you don't let yourself down, because it's classic, isn't it? I think, you know, you're only as good as your last battle.
Yeah.
So, but I did that 10 years ago. What did you do yesterday?
Yeah.
What did you do today? And I say this to my clients, if I can't help you, I'm not going to string you along for years because it puts money in my pocket.
Yeah.
When I look at the personal training world and see people who've been training people for 10 years, unless that person's a psychological crutch, which I get.
Sure.
But if they came to you to run a marathon, or they came to you to lose 10 kilos and they haven't achieved that, you're not doing your job. And maybe you should say, this isn't for me, but I know this person.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same as a coach. My success as a coach is based on whether I can help you achieve or help you realize that you wanted to achieve something else.
Yeah.
But then I want them to go away and say, well, that person's got morals, they've got integrity, they've got consistency. But the same for you. If you're going to say, these are the things I stand for, you now have to prove it. You now have to do it every day. But if you let yourself down, which we all do, things go wrong, we don't always live up to it.
Yep.
Have a look at it, be honest with yourself, know yourself, look at why. Okay, I'm going to do better tomorrow.
I saw this fantastic image yesterday, which really highlighted the power of consistency above motivation. And the image was 2 circles, and these circles were made up of matchsticks that went round in a circle. And underneath one, it said motivation, and the matchsticks were all sporadic. And some of them were really long, some of them were really short, some of them were far apart, some of them were close, and it looked a mess, right? And then underneath the other one, it said consistency, and they were all the same length, and they all had the exact same distance between them, and it made a perfect circle. And it was just this beautiful image. And I was like, that is so powerful, because we think that motivation is this incredible thing, right? And it's like, wow, I'm feeling really motivated today. I'm going to get so much done. But then, of course, if we're not consistent the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day, we are this sporadic mess. Yeah. The consistency, I respect consistency.
Consistency is key, and I think it was Bertrand Russell who said it was the least regular is the wrong word. I'm paraphrasing terribly, but it's the human trait that we see the least, consistency.
Wow.
But if we did see more of it as individuals, collectively, what could we achieve? But yeah, I get very frustrated right now with the world. I'm letting into my mindset that people aren't consistent enough with their values. They'll employ them here where it suits, but I'm not going to employ them here because it doesn't suit. And that, to me, that's the quickest way somebody can lose my support or make me think that there's a little bit of a lack of integrity there.
Yeah.
If you're going to push really hard with this belief system, you've got to employ it everywhere.
I love that, and I completely agree. And I tell you what, it really is highlighting to me as you say that, because in terms of creating our personal ethos, what do I want people to say about me as I leave the room? That, of course, is going to be so heavily linked to values.
Yeah.
You know, what do we value, and what do we value about ourselves and in general? And therefore, somebody not being consistent with their values, they're not being consistent with that personal ethos. They're not earning that beret every day.
No, and if you're coaching people, if that's who's listening to this, and you are coaching people, you want to coach people, and your client sees that you've got a lack of consistency, what does that say about what you're going to do with them? Are you going to be consistent with them, with what you're advising, what you're talking about? Are you going to turn up on time? Are you going, that it says everything about you. If you let people down with that consistency and they see it, whenever I help people who are in any sort of public eye, it's even more important because people will jump on it.
So true.
They'll find a hole in what you're saying and they'll pull you down for it.
What is a topic which, when you do these interviews and you do these podcasts, what is a topic that you would absolutely love to talk about that you don't often get the chance to? Either you don't get asked about it or it just doesn't come up in conversation, but you think subconsciously or consciously, I'd love to talk about that more.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think what that would be. Do you know what? Honestly, there are probably so many little things where I'm like, oh, that would be really interesting for people. That would be really interesting for people. One that's in my head because you said something and we went off in another direction, but I thought would be quite interesting, was you mentioned smoking. Sounds like I'm at a tangent, but and it's just really the way that people can get over an addiction, or a little nugget of advice that I learned on my psychology masters that I've really carried with me, because most of us have something that we do regularly. Some of them, I hold my hands up and say I'm addicted to exercise, but that's probably not a bad addiction, but it can be, right?
Sure.
It can get to a bad side. But most of us have got something that's either good or bad. And I often work with people who may be of an addiction to poor foods or poor lifestyle habits. And something that was discussed by one of the clinical psychologists during my course was, if we take famous people who have overdosed on, say, heroin or something, often it's in a hotel room or something like that.
Very true.
Right. Why? Why does that happen? And the reason is, it's to do with the physiological changes that happen pre taking a hit heroin, going for your cigarette, going for your Big Mac, whatever your personal addiction is, poor sexual behavior, whatever it may be, gambling. And what happens is we spoke about dopamine before, the dopamine hit that is now the body wants, and you're going to get rewarded as soon as you decide that you're going to do this. Right, I'm going to go and get the heroin hit, for example. Now what happens is, and they've shown this with dogs, ethics these days, but shown it with dogs, if we are going to give the human being the hit of heroin, that's going to depress the breathing rate and depress the heart rate. So what happens is, when they know that when the body knows you're going to take that heroin, it does that ahead of time.
Okay.
Now, what the person starts to do then to combat that, compensate for that, is they start to up their dose, which is why we say that they're becoming, they need to up the dose to counteract the heart rate and the breathing rate. Now, what we now know is that actually only happens when they do it in the normal environment. So you spoke about the smokers, why it came into my head, so I'm coming around now. The smokers that they're going to struggle to give up smoking because they're with their friends. It's where they do it. When they go to a hotel room, that's not their home. It's not with their normal friends. It's somewhere else. So now they get that dopamine hit. We're going to do the heroin, but they up the amount because that's what they've been used to doing. But the heart rate and the breathing rate hasn't depressed in the same way.
Wow,
Because they're in a different environment,
Mm.
and now they overdose. So why am I telling you this? If you're working with anybody and you're coaching them, understanding that is really interesting. It's going to be much, much harder for them to overcome that addictive thing where they always do it.
Wow.
So that might mean, depending on what it is, you might need to discuss with somebody, have you ever thought of moving home? Because if your neighbour is an alcoholic, or you're an MMA athlete that has sometimes coped with smoking, and you share a room with another MMA athlete who's a big time smoker but has got the fitness to get over it.
Yeah.
Poor example, but you get where I'm
Sure.
going. Have you ever thought about, why would I want to move house? I don't know, just fresh start. But that might be what they need, because they keep slipping back into something they
It's
don't want.
so true and so powerful. Within the realm of NLP, we talk about the neurological levels of change, and it's the baseline change, neurological level, environment, behavior, capability,
Exactly that.
values and belief, identity. And we know that it trickles down, you change your identity, they all change, but you change your environment, you can also create change in this direction as well. And it's one of the ones that we have control over without needing to rely on our subconscious mind, right? We can choose consciously to just remove ourselves from one environment and put ourselves into another.
Yeah.
Should never be underestimated, the power of that.
But it's really hard to do. And if you want me to speak about something else that's kind of interesting to me at the moment.
Yes, please.
So, to add to my coaching strings to my bow, I realised that when you're working with people, often, I said again, everybody's got something. Sometimes it skips into this guilt, shame, embarrassment space. Now, as a coach, we often think, well, I'm going to need, if I realise there's something there, am I going to have to ask the questions to get what that is? But some people don't want to tell you what that is, understandably.
No.
And there's other things that come out. And from a psychologist's point of view, I can sometimes see this. We've got general anxiety disorder. We might have fear of failure. We might have success inhibition. And I realised that we're going to have to work with these things. But sometimes these things can take a lot of time to work through. So actually through a friend, pseudo-client that I mentioned already during this, I got introduced to something called BWRT, which is brain working recursive therapy.
Tell us.
Which is a type of therapy that basically says a lot of the decisions is the wrong word. A lot of the things that happen to us happen pre-awareness. So the way I describe this is if I take a pile of something in my hand and throw it at you, you're going to do that. Yeah. That's pre-awareness. It's a built-in defense mechanism, and then you'll realise it's confetti and you'll laugh at me.
Yeah.
But you need to wait for that reaction before you can react. When we drive, once we've gone through driving tests and everything, and we've been driving for 3, 4, 5, we can just drive somewhere. And it's just happened, right? Yeah. If I said to you, I want you to be a really good driver today, and you start trying to concentrate on it, you'll probably make more mistakes.
Totally.
It's in that pre-awareness space, and you'll brake before you realise that something's run into the road, right? Your foot will move. So we know that this exists. And by a guy called Libet, who started the experiments, we know that it's possibly 1/10 of a second and 1/3 of a second. He did an experiment with pressing buttons when things were spinning. We can see that the brain lights up before we do it. So we know there's a pre-awareness space. And this happens, right? This is pre-awareness, and now I can laugh. So let's take a really simple one, general anxiety disorder or speaking in public. If your brain has learned that you didn't die from a previous cascade of hormones, then you survived, that was positive. So your cerebellum, which sits in a psychological explanation of the brain rather than a more biological explanation. There's the reptilian complex of the brain that came from reptiles, and that's been built on evolutionary by the neomammalian, and that's been built on by the paleomammalian, neomammalian, prefrontal cortex, where we think about everything. We know that the amygdala drives our emotion, and we know that our prefrontal cortex will understand our drives from our amygdala and our emotional. We went back to purpose, and now I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get to this purpose. But pre-emotion, pre the amygdala, we've got this reptilian complex, and we've got the cerebellum, which is our pattern recognition complex. So if I picked up this microphone and showed it to you, your brain's going through everything. Oh, it's a microphone. If I show you something you don't know, it's trying to find, it's a couple of things, right? So we know that we're always trying to work out what things are. So if something didn't kill you before from a response, well, that's the most simple one. We'll give it to you. So if you got high heart rate, sweating, nervous, shaky voice the last time you spoke in public, but you didn't die, I've got to speak in public again. What's your brain going to say? Oh, well, this is what we're going to do. It's already happened before you're aware of it. So yes, we can try things like slow. We know that will maybe have an effect on our parasympathetic nervous system. We can try these things, but what if we can affect before the awareness? What if we can change the natural response? And that's what BWT works on.
Wow.
So it works on a wait state. We're going to freeze it like the fight, fright, flight.
Yeah.
And then we work on changing that, the the way that the neurons interact with each other, you know, it's all sort of, you think of hair nets piled on top of each other and they're all working. We just try to work on changing the patterns that are there in a very quick succession. Some people only need one session. So that's something I'm working on at the moment. I mean,
that is absolutely fascinating. What are some of the approaches to being able to achieve that change and create that change?
So it all works on using. Sometimes it's the earliest memory, but it doesn't need to be. And sometimes it's or more often, it's the most significant memory. Let's say it's anxiety disorder. It's, can you remember the worst time out of 10? How bad was it? And now we use a preferred response. How would you like to feel? And we use working between the two and changing how the brain might see that, rather than knowing this is what always happens, this is what always happens, here's a preferred response. So it's difficult to explain in this way.
Sure,
something you kind of have to do with somebody. But I've found it really fascinating to do. I'll hold my hands up and say I've finished the course but I haven't done my exam yet. So I need to get you have to do a live exam with one of the practitioners that's been doing it for some time, and then off you go. But in my learning, I've tried a couple of sessions with a couple of people to say, look, it seems pretty powerful.
Incredible. I'd love to be a guinea pig.
I'm more than happy. Yeah.
I would love to be a guinea pig, you know, and if it's part of your exam process or anything, or just aside from that, mate, I'm here for you.
It works over Zoom, over FaceTime and that sort of thing as well. So apparently it can even work over the phone. So I need to learn a certain part of it by rote. That's something you have to do for the exam. So when I have, let's catch up.
Let's do it, mate.
You can let people know if it worked for you.
Definitely. Yeah, of course. You know, and this is a great platform to let people know as well. Sean, what is something that you've never told anyone before?
It's probably not something I've never told anybody because close members of family and things know. But I've become really interested in our innate moral cognitions.
Okay, tell me.
So people do know this because I studied it for my dissertation and my master's, and Exeter University offered me a PhD in this realm, but it's not something I've spoken about on a podcast, so maybe interest you. So
go for it.
A guy called Hauser, and with some work from a guy called McHale. McHale has the concept that is widely agreed now that we have a moral grammar. So in the same way that we have Chomsky said that we have a grammar that's universal, and that's why we can create language. It doesn't matter the language, but we learn languages so quickly, there must be something innate that we're born with that allows us to do this, which because of humans have been around for a pretty long time. So in the same way then, is there an innate moral grammar? Do we have a morality that we all agree on? And Hauser tested this in over 120 different countries and showed that regardless of age, gender, religion, ethnic background, ethics and philosophy and educational background, we pretty much share the same innate moral grammar.
Wow, interesting.
Unless you're a psychopath.
Okay.
and there's now theories that rather than being categorical in terms of personality disorders, which psychopathy, sociopathy could be, it's more of a spectrum. So if this is 100% and this is 0%, you're born somewhere on here with an upper and a lower limit, and nature via nurture can push you one with it. And that's the same for maybe your personality, openness, conscientiousness, that sort of thing. So with the innate moral grammar, what they use is, have you seen trolley dilemmas or train dilemmas?
No.
So we've got a train track.
Okay.
And there's a train and the driver's passed out for whatever reason.
Okay.
There's 5 people on the track, and the train is going to run into those 5 people.
Right.
Joe is stood at the side of the track.
Yep.
And there's a lever. Joe can pull that lever, which will switch the train to a side track.
Yep.
There's one person on the side track.
Wow.
Should Joe pull the lever?
Interesting.
You don't have to answer.
Very interesting.
So people initially think this is deontological versus utilitarian, but the moral grammar that McHale has put forward has showed us it's a little bit more nuanced than that, and it's actually a means versus side effect. So in that point, most people say, yes, the lever should be pulled. We're going to save the 5, but 1 will die. So now we change that slightly. Train's running towards these people, driver's fainted, 5 on the track. There's no side track, but Joe stood next to a rather large, overweight individual that if that person was shoved in front of the train, it would stop the train, saving the 5 people.
Okay.
Should Joe push the person in front of the train?
Interesting.
Now, at that point, most people say no.
Interesting.
It's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
So what we find is that if the means is to save the 5.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull the track to save the 5, and the side effect is the death of that person.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
Yeah.
If the means is to kill, I'm going to push the person. That's the side effect is to save. We don't do it. So some people say, well, no. I'd always save the 5. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a doctor.
Yeah.
You've got a patient in front of you. They've got a bit of a cold, but otherwise they're fine. Upstairs, you've got 5 people that are going to die within 48 hours. One needs a new heart. One needs a new liver. One needs a kidney. One needs a kidney.
Right.
One needs lungs.
Right.
Or you could take this person, chop them up. You could save 5. Are you going to do that? No.
Wow.
So these things, and what I did was broaden this to look at other species. Do we hold the same thing? And my assumption was that vegans and vegetarians might hold the same moral grammar for non-humans, whereas meat eaters wouldn't. And my hypothesis was proved wrong.
Right.
We actually hold the same nuanced moral grammar, innate moral cognitions for non-human animals. So then we looked at, maybe then we do it for inanimate objects. Maybe it's not sentience. Maybe we do for 5 iPhones versus 1 iPhone.
Yeah.
5 sports cars versus 1. But we don't. It's the innate moral grammar stuff, I find, and it comes back to your consistency.
Yeah.
Do you consistently use your morals in the same way? Do you consistently have the integrity to say, well, this is what I do here, this is what I do here? So, I fell down a rabbit hole with that, but I found it really interesting.
How have you managed to relate that to your coaching, or put it into your coaching offering, if at all at this stage?
Yeah, probably not explicitly, more implicitly. But if a client talks about issues they have with other people in terms of, well, why would they do this? Why has this happened? Then maybe we start talking about moral judgments, what morality is to them. Because we use it as if everybody knows what it is. And yes, there is an innate moral grammar, which is really interesting, but moral behavior versus your innate moral cognitions are 2 different things, because your innate moral cognitions might say X, but your moral behavior might say Y. Now, where I found that quite interesting, and I've talked to the military about doing a PhD with military personnel, is if my innate moral grammar, my innate moral cognitions say this, which we've shown from research, but I do this, am I opening myself up for PTSD? And what we see with people who work in slaughterhouses is a large amount of PTSD.
Wow.
And it's a very nuanced type of PTSD. But the problem is have you ever met anybody who said, when I'm older, I want to work in a slaughterhouse?
Yeah.
No, they don't. It's low socioeconomic people. In a lot of countries, it's refugees. It's people who can't get any other work. But what the research has showed us is not only is there a type of PTSD around slaughterhouses, there's a lot of domestic abuse. There's a lot of alcohol.
Really?
And
Wow.
that is because these people are doing something that is completely against, as the research showed that I did, is completely against your innate moral cognitions. So how do I relate this to my clients?
Yeah.
If you're depressed, if you're feeling bad, is there anything you're doing with your life that is contrary to what we spoke about, your own personal ethos? What are you doing that isn't right? Well, I'm in sales and I need to make money, so I'm selling this to these businesses, but I know they don't need it. Would you like to do something else with your life? I always wanted to be an X.
That's key.
How would you be an X? Well, I'd have to go back to uni. Could you go back to uni? And then, because you're never going to overcome that. You can pretend, you can meditate on it, you can say, I'm going to be okay with the fact that what I'm doing for work. But as we've shown with the research on those people, they're doing something that fundamentally...
That is absolutely key. Without the risk of oversimplifying this, I've always explained on this podcast and to all of my clients that in my mind, the closest thing that we can get to an exact formula for happiness is to know what your top 5 core values are. And really that can be very much linked to the ethos, the personal ethos. Yeah. And if you find yourself living a life that is sacrificing those values on one way or another, you're going to feel down, you're going to feel depressed, you're going to feel sad. And like you mentioned, you can even open yourself up to PTSD doing that. Yeah. If you're living a life that supports and is loyal to those top 5 core values, that in my mind is the closest thing we'll get to a formula for happiness. It's understand those values and live by them. And I love what we were talking about earlier in terms of that, though, the ethos and the values given to you upon, you call it passing out?
Yeah, when you get your Green Beret, and you, about a week later after getting your Green Beret, you'll pass out and then you'll go off to a commando unit or whatever your job is. So yeah, you get given a card. It's in my wallet, actually. I'll show you when we're done.
Oh, I'd love that.
And on that, in fact, you can have it. I'll get another one.
Oh,
it's got the Royal Marines core values, and the commando values, and then they're in your pocket.
Yeah,
They're
in your
with you.
pocket. That is key as well, isn't it? Because like I think you just need to be living by those values of whatever your personal ethos is. And if you don't, and you're neglecting them and you're abusing them and you're not loyal to them, you're going to be opening yourself up to a whole world that you don't want to be a part of.
Yeah, and do you know what I say to people? If you're going down this route, if this is the complete change that you want to have in yourself, or I want to nail down what I want, all of us now can choose what our phone background, or when we pick up our phone and we see the time on the iPhone, write them there.
Yeah.
Because how many times a day do you pick that phone up?
Yeah.
So you'll see them every day. Some people used to do the old post-it on a mirror when you're brushing your teeth. Great, yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
But you'll see it in the morning, you'll see it in the afternoon. With the steam, it will fall off.
Yeah.
But if you put it onto your phone, it's there every day for you to see it, and you can't get away from it. And it might be that a month later, you put something else on there that you want to remind yourself. But it's a really good thing on your home screen.
What is a question that I've not asked you that you think, I really want Liam to ask me this question so I can talk about this?
Another good question, and one that I'm probably going to struggle to answer. I think I said to you that my pillars, if you like, or my foundations and my pillars for the way I coach, sleep is fundamental. Now, I don't know if you've had people who are specific with sleep and that sort of thing come on, but I think if I was going to impart any knowledge on the wider audience or on coaches, sleep is so fundamental. I think if you're not addressing it with your clients, you are missing a trick.
Yeah.
So it's probably, why do you think sleep's so important? But I don't. If you've covered it before with somebody else, I'm more.
No, haven't.
Okay.
No, let's dive into that.
So sleep is an interesting one for me because when I joined the Marines, we didn't have what is now called the human performance cell, which is about how we can, in the same way that elite sport does, how we can get the best out of individuals, because we know that we'll break them if we don't. Right?
Yeah.
Operations consistently, stress consistently is going to break people, civilians and military. When I first joined, sleep deprivation was just, we're going to hammer you with sleep deprivation because that tests you. And if you can function when you've got that little sleep, then you can function anywhere. But also, I believe it was, I think 60 started in my intake and 34 finished, and that sort of 40% mark was generally what you'd get. Now, how many of those were really not good enough, or how many of those didn't have the genetic resilience with lack of sleep or whatever it may, and sleep, I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Freud. No, I don't think it was, actually. It's wrong. Lack of sleep or tiredness will bring back anxieties you've conquered years ago.
Wow.
And it does. We know that. So there's a really interesting guy, I'm not going to say any of this is mine, called Matthew Walker, who's done a lot of sleep studies. There's a few sleep researchers out there. But what we now know, and now the Royal Marines looks at when we're training people, we need to give them sleep deprivation weeks and then give them decent sleep. And if we want them to perform well before a specific test, we need to try and make sure we get sleep. And we can use it sometimes to test them when they don't. But basically what we've shown, or what Matthew Walker and other researchers have shown, is that a lack of decent sleep, when I say decent sleep, I'm talking 7 to 8.5 hours, is going to give you poor cognitions. And even, and I say this every time I mention the guy because he's got some great points that some people are negative. Even somebody like Jordan Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist, who's worked for years and years and years, has said the first thing he sorts out with a client is making sure they eat breakfast and making sure they're sleeping right.
Wow.
Because if they don't do those two things, lack of nutrition, lack of food, the brain works with energy in the same way the rest of the body does. You're not going to have good thought processes.
Sure.
If you don't have good sleep, you're not going to have good thought processes.
Yeah.
So if you're working with a client as a coach and they're not eating and they're not sleeping, if you don't sort those two things. Now, I work with somebody who's really interesting for this then. He liked playing online games with the only friends he had until 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning because they were all American. Now, I don't want to take his friends away from him.
Interesting.
But how can I get him to start functioning in society and holding down jobs if that's what he wants to do? And that won't go any further than that. But that one was a challenge. Well, you need to go to bed at 10 p.m. and you need to get up at 8 a.m. Okay, well, now I don't see my friends ever. So how does that work? Because that might be the only thing that's keeping him going at this point.
What pops into my head as you say that is the foundations that you were talking about before, of like in terms of sleep and nutrition, they just have to be the thing that are looked after before anything else.
You won't get the mental health and you won't get the physical health. People won't train. They'll be too tired to do it. So sleep is so fundamental. But what we've also seen from the sleep research is that, and although anecdotal, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan are two really good examples that are used for this, is consistent lack of sleep for years and years and years means that the negative build-ups of certain substances in the brain that get removed every night don't get removed, and we end up with dementia.
Oof.
We end up with mental health issues. So this is one of my big bugbears, and there'll probably be some people out there who are going to disagree with this, and please, I'm more than happy to have a chat. This whole thing of you must get up at 4 or 5 in the morning to achieve more, and if it's one of yours, I'm happy to discuss it, is fine.
Yeah.
If you're going to go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock.
Absolutely.
If you're somebody who's still going to be watching Netflix and playing PlayStation till 11 p.m. and then you're going to get up at 4 or 5, not only will you be half-arsing the work you do and the fact that you can't give 100% on everything you want to do in your job, in your relationships, at the gym, with your goals and your purposes, but you are also setting yourself up, potentially, some genetic predisposition, I'm assuming, but you're setting yourself up for some mental health, dementia issues in the future.
And that's something I've never heard on this topic, which is really interesting. You know, you hear the fact that you're not going to be able to concentrate the next day, you're going to be half-assing the work that you do, but that long-term effect of this is something that has never been, because I'm quite an interesting case actually with that. And the reason I'm an interesting case is because I 100% agree with everything you've just said, and yet at the same time, I fall into the traps. And I fall into the traps often. And I feel like part of the reason why I fall into the traps is I love late nights. You know, I find that almost to be a kind of like sanctuary in a way. And I think I've got a 2-year-old daughter. So then by the time she goes to bed, and then often my wife will go to bed a little bit before me. And it's kind of like just a little bit of time where I'll be able to engage in something that's just for me or something. You know, I love watching documentaries, for instance. That's like, I'm really into documentaries. So that's kind of my time. And yet at the same time, I love early mornings. I love getting up early and sort of like that fresh morning air and being the first one in the coffee shop and stuff. But I understand the problem. Not to the extent of what you just said, though. That's most certainly planted a seed in my head where I'm thinking, Jesus, I don't want that to be the case.
Do you exercise? Do you train?
I do train. Yeah, I've trained for years, but I've recently hired a PT. I've actually not trained over a very long period of time. 6 months, not in the gym, no exercise.
When you did you pick up any injuries?
Yes, yeah.
More than the most, the same?
Fair
share.
Just a couple of like significant ones.
Okay,
not a regular thing, but
Matthew Walker also bucketed professional athletes over 8 hours sleep, 6 to 8, 4 to 6, less than 4, and then their injury levels.
Wow. Okay.
And all right, it's correlation.
Yeah, sure.
He also said, and this one really slapped me around the face, the incidence of strokes and heart attacks the day after the clocks change is the biggest worldwide experiment we can do to show that losing an hour's sleep causes significant health problems.
Wow.
So again, I have changed my coaching completely from a Royal Marine who's like, you can cope with sleep. Obviously, I've coped with 15 minutes over 3 days or whatever it may be. I don't know when I'm not going to sleep, and you just function. To if you don't get this right, you're going to get injured when you're doing your physical training more, according to the research. You could set yourself up for mental health issues in the future. And we're just not going to get the best out of you when we're coaching you. So when I used to train people face-to-face physically, if somebody turned up and they hadn't eaten, be like, you're wasting my time, go.
Right.
And how much sleep did you get last night? Right, we're going to do a different session. Because we could injure you. Because when you haven't slept, right, your coordination isn't as good, your ability to function. So
100%.
You know, so these things. So hence I asked, did you get injured? Were you doing your late night, your early mornings? So it's fine. But as you say, you haven't trained for a while, so maybe you don't need it as much at the moment. But we recover. Rest. Recovery equals successful training. But we recover when we sleep, physically, mentally. We need that. So it's fundamental.
That is a new perspective, which, in terms of from what the perspectives that I've heard so far, that is very affecting on me. It's really had an effect just on the basis of what you've just said. Because again, I've only ever heard the surface level stuff that, well, you're just not going to be able to concentrate the next day. But actually, it's that recovery element to it and the long-term prevention of things like dementia that's just had a real effect on me.
And they've also shown now, you know, it's not even an argument. Pretty much every mental health disorder, and let's take the normal ones, the more popular is the wrong word, but depression and anxiety, poor sleep is linked. Now, whether anxiety causes poor sleep or poor sleep causes anxiety, depression causes poor sleep, it's kind of out, it doesn't matter. Chicken and egg, but we know that when we get depressed, we don't sleep as well. But if we're not sleeping as well, poor cognitions, we're going to get depressed. So we all have the ability to get these disorders, to have these issues. So consistently not sleeping very well for whatever reason, is it going to make, especially personality types, I've spoken about the ocean framework, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, disagreeableness, and neuroticism. If you're highly neurotic and highly conscientious, now you can be great with your own business, you can be great in the workforce, but you're highly neurotic, so you don't sleep very well, and the next day you go in and maybe somebody's looking at you because you've got on a new coat, but you start to think, oh, what have I done? That neuroticism, because you haven't slept very well. You know, so again, it's, what did we say really early on? Know yourself. Know your personality type, and know that this can be a brilliant thing, but if I haven't slept very well, those demons that I've conquered years ago will be worse when I'm tired. I'm now going to be maybe a little bit more anxious today at work. I'm going to be a little bit more worried when somebody asks me, have you finished that report? Yeah, well, it was, well, no, I just wanted to know. You know,
just a question.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of golden nuggets throughout this, Sean, honestly, and just thank you so much for coming in and spending your very valuable time to sit and have this conversation for the benefit of all the listeners and all the watchers. Based on everything we've spoken about so far, and we've covered a lot of basis as well, how would you tie it up for the listeners? What do you think is the best way of putting a bow on this, just so they can leave this session and be able to implement what we've been talking about?
This has just popped into my head, so maybe it was pre-awareness, who knows?
Yes, very nice.
I've written a few books. First book I wrote, I was full-time for the Royal Marines, got asked to write the Royal Marines Guide to Fitness, and that got published. And then the publisher, Haynes, said, we'd love you to get you to write more books. And that was actually a bit of a spur to leave, if you like, a drive to leave, and I wrote a few more books. The last book I wrote for Haynes was a transformation guide, which was taking somebody from unhealthy, unfit, overweight, to not quite a cover model, but much healthier. You're going to live a longer life. And that encompasses sleep, diet, nutrition, physical health, mental health, all these things. And what I said at one point at the end of any transformation, when people are like, is it finished? Well, it's never perfect. Any manuscript for a book, the minute I give it in, I'm going to read something else, I'm going to hear something else, and I would change it. So when people say to me, oh, I've got your book, I'd write a different book today. If I wrote that book today, it would be so different. So how do I tie this up? Whether it's a client or whether it's you as a coach, there is no end. There is no perfect. Perfect doesn't exist, because what you think is perfect now, today, tomorrow it's not. And that's, I guess, what I would say is it's a never-ending journey. Have a purpose, complete that purpose as best you can, or if it means that it doesn't happen, look for the next one, but have another. It's not failure if you don't make it. It's just reassessing the goals, looking at why, and going for the next one. But there's no end, there's no perfect. It's just a continual journey. Definitely, mate. I couldn't agree more. Where can all of the listeners find you and connect with you? Where's the best place? So I sit on social media, Instagram, Sean Lerwill. There is a Twitter and a YouTube as well, but I must admit, because I'm at the moment doing contracts for the military, I've been a little bit less vocal on those. Sure. And there is a website out there as well, seanlerwill.com, which is going through a bit of an upheaval as I move more towards taking on some coaching clients again, rather than the books and that sort of thing. So please do get in touch. If you enjoyed this, you got any questions, then let me know. I'd love to finish this, Sean, just with a few words of appreciation, if that's okay. We've only met today. You are incredibly charismatic. Well, thank you. You're very likable. You're extremely easy to talk to. You are clearly an expert as well. And when I have the opportunity to actually sit and speak with an expert, it feels different and the conversation is different. And you can really tell when an expert is handing over these nuggets of information that if somebody was to listen to it and apply it, their life will change. Hopefully. And I can really feel that, you know, and it's one of those situations where some of these things could create change today, and some of them can create a ripple effect, which will create change over a long-term period of time. I feel your passion, I can feel your drive, and I can feel your desire to just want to share the things that you've picked up over time and what you've learned and how you've transformed. And so I just want to thank you for that. I think that is a really incredible way of utilizing your time and your presence, of which you have a lot, and your expertise. So yeah, appreciate you, Sean. Pleasure, absolute pleasure. And I thank you for the opportunity to do that. Anytime, anytime.